What's up, guys? This is my second video, and due to the good reaction to the first one, I thought I might make a second video. And I think I'm going to start doing this consistently with two videos every week, one video on Friday, and then one video on the following Monday. So let's just dive right in. Um, this is where I think the Senate race for 2020 stands right now, with the Republicans holding 42 seats and the Democrats holding 43 seats. Obviously, only a third of the Senate seats are up every 2 years because each senator holds a 6 year term. So only, I guess this time around, it's 35 seats are up for grabs because of a few special elections. But I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on the states that I've chosen to be safe Democratic or safe Republican. Some people might say, like, there was a poll that had Lindsey Graham within the margin of error in South Carolina, but I think it's going to be a solid Republican. Um, some people might think Tennessee, my home state of Tennessee, but I think that's going to safely go for I guess the former diplomat to Japan. Trump has endorsed in Tennessee, so I think he'll have that pretty solid. And in Mississippi, I know there was a special election there in 2019, but I think Senator Hyde Smith, she's polling about 10 points above her opponent, so I think Mississippi will stay in the Republican column. All right, so let's jump right into the states that I think are likely either way. So the first state is the state of New Hampshire. Um, Senator Shaheen, Jan Shaheen, is the incumbent there, and I think that she will stay. She will win re-election there. And New Hampshire is one of the states that I think could go either way between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But I think that senators, if they're the incumbent, tend to have an advantage regardless of the president's race going on there. I mean, that definitely is a factor that affects it. But Senator Shaheen has approval ratings above 50%, so I expect her to keep the state of New Hampshire. Next up is Minnesota. Similar type of deal here. Minnesota is a state that I think will be very close in the presidential election, but Tina Smith, the incumbent, I don't think that she will have a hard time keeping the seat. I think her opponent is Jason Lewis, who's in the House of Representatives in Minnesota. So he might be a formidable opponent, but I expect her to win this state between 5 and 10 points. Next up is the state of Alabama, and boy, is this a weird state. If you'll remember in 2017, this is the state that Doug Jones, the Democrat, won. He beat Roy Moore. I mean, that was the craziest race because Roy Moore won barely in the Republican primary because Alabama Republicans were not very happy when the governor of Alabama appointed Luther Strange to the Senate after Donald Trump brought Jeff Sessions, who's the former Alabama senator, to be in his cabinet. But I think in 2020, when push comes to shove, I think that Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn football coach, will beat Jeff Sessions in the Republican primary and then go on to beat Doug Jones in the general election. I know this is kind of a contested primary between Tommy Tuberville and Jeff Sessions. Donald Trump has endorsed Tommy Tuberville, even though Jeff Sessions was the first U.S. senator to endorse Donald Trump. I know there's a little bit of bad blood between Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump after Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe. But both Jeff Sessions and Tommy Tuberville are polling about 10 points ahead of Doug Jones. So I don't suspect that to be a very close race. Next up is Texas. I know this was a very popular race in 2018 to look at, Ted Cruz versus Beto O'Rourke. I don't think it will be as close in 2020. In fact, I suspect John Cornyn, who is the incumbent Republican there, to outperform Donald Trump, actually, just because in swing states or in swing states on the presidential level, typically the incumbent senator does better than the presidential nominee, and I suspect the same thing in New Hampshire and Minnesota. So I suspect John Cornyn to win probably by around 5 points, and Donald Trump might only win it by like 1 or 2 points. So next up is Kansas. Kansas, you don't normally think of this as being a swing state, but Chris Kobach is likely to win to the Republican primary, and he is a very controversial figure. If you remember, he was the former Kansas Secretary of State. He ran for governor in Kansas in 2018 and lost. And I mean, this is Kansas. This is the Wizard of Oz, the yellow brick road. We aren't in Kansas anymore. Kansas is supposed to be the state that is solidly Republican, but because Chris Kobach will probably come out of this very contested Republican primary, there's a chance he could lose it. He is not very popular. He's very staunch on immigration and alienates a lot of modern voters. And his opponent, Barbara Bollier, seems pretty solid. But just because Kansas is so Republican, I think it's like 2-1 registered Republicans. I think Chris Kobach will pull out this victory. But there'll probably be a lot of negative media attention drawn towards this race and Chris Kobach. All right, and lastly is the state of Kentucky. I think a lot of people think of Kentucky as a solidly Republican state, but Kentucky was another one of those states that elected a Democratic governor in the special elections of 2019, like Kansas, which did in 2018. And Mitch McConnell is a much vilified senator from the left and even from the right. I think he has the lowest approval ratings of any U.S. senator, close to Susan Collins, actually. But I suspect Mitch McConnell to pull it out. His opponent, Amy McGrath, will probably be a pretty strong opponent. She is a veteran. But she has to walk a very fine line. I know at first she came out, she said that she would vote for Kavanaugh before the midterm elections, but then she actually had to flip-flop on that and said that she would oppose him just because the Democratic base and, I mean, Twitter just went after her. They were saying, we don't want to elect any Democrat that would vote for Brett Kavanaugh to be the Supreme Court justice. But I know Kentucky is going to be flooded with a lot of money. So next up, I'm going to the lean states, and I'm going to go to the state of Montana. And people might say, like, why is this just a lean state? I mean, it's Montana. It's a Republican stronghold. Well, Steve Bullock, the former 2020 presidential candidate for the Democrats, announced that he's going to run for Senate in Montana. And Steve Bullock, who's the former governor of Montana, or he might be the current governor. I'm actually not 100% sure, but he won in 2016 for the governorship by 5 points in Montana as a Democrat in a state that went 20% for Donald Trump. So, and this is what he tried to say in the Democratic debates and in his campaign, is being like, look, I'm a Democrat who can win in these states that Donald Trump did. Typically on the national scale, voters will vote more towards their partisan level. So there's obviously a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump and Steve Bullock in 2016, but I suspect that on the national scale, more people will probably vote for the incumbent Steve Daines. So I suspect Steve Daines to win this state probably by 4 or 5 points. It will definitely help that he is running in a presidential election year. He can ride Donald Trump's coattails. Steve Daines, the incumbent, has been endorsed by Donald Trump. But the polling right now has it neck and neck, but I suspect Steve Daines will pull it out. Next up is the state of Colorado. I suspect this to lean towards the Democrats. Oops. There we go. John Hickenlooper is likely to be the Democratic nominee for Senate here. He's also a former presidential candidate. Colorado is one of those states that's been turning blue for a while, and Cory Gardner won by the skin of his teeth in 2014 in a wave year for the Republicans. So I suspect this to definitely go back to the Democrats in 2020. I think Cory Gardner is probably the most vulnerable incumbent senator. Actually, I'd probably say Doug Jones, but for the Republicans, he's the most vulnerable incumbent senator. So I suspect John Hickenlooper to probably win the state by about 5 points and probably have it match Joe Biden's margin of victory. Okay, so next up is the Georgia Senate election, and this is not the Georgia special election, which I'll get to later. But I suspect that David Perdue, the incumbent, will beat his opponent, who's likely to be John Ossoff. He's a filmmaker. David Perdue has fairly good approval ratings. I suspect him to outperform Donald Trump by a little bit. But I think David Perdue will probably win this state by about 3 or 4 points. So next up is the state of Arizona. A lot of people have the state as a pure toss-up, but just looking at the polls, I think that former astronaut John Kelly will probably win this state relatively handily. I will go more in depth into the special elections in Georgia and Arizona in a later video, but these are both very weird elections. They're special elections, but I suspect John Kelly to beat Martha McSally by about 3 or 4 points, and that's how the polls have it looking right now. John Kelly is very popular. I mean, a former astronaut. So I suspect the Democrats to win that race. In Iowa, this is the last state I have in the lean column. I think that Joni Ernst, although she's not the most popular Republican senator, I think that she'll ride Donald Trump's coattails. It's a state that Donald Trump won by about 10 points, and will probably replicate that in 2020. I expect her to probably win by 2 or 3 points. The Iowa primary for the Democrats is a little contested. Probably Teresa Greenfield will come out victorious, but there isn't a super obvious Democratic nominee who I think will be a super strong opponent to Joni Ernst. It's my clock over there. All right, and lastly, so right now we are at 49 for the Republicans and 47 for the Democrats. So now I'm going to go into the tilt states. So the first tilt state I want to do is the state of Michigan, and a lot of people will probably call me crazy for this because they think, okay, Michigan, the incumbent Senator Gary Peters, how can you think that that's a tilt state? It's probably more leans or likely. Well, John James, who ran for Senate in 2018, vastly outperformed the polls in a 2018 wave year, even though he lost by 6 points in the governor's race. That was a 10-point margin. And John James, I think, is a rising superstar for the Republicans. I suspect that he might be the keynote speaker at the Republican National Convention. I mean, being a veteran, being African American, I think there's going to be a lot of money pouring into this race to support John James. I mean, I've watched some of his videos, like in speeches, and I think he's going to be a superstar in the Republican primary, and he could um, start his stardom if he has a come from behind victory, underdog victory in Michigan. But still, I think Michigan will probably go for Joe Biden by a small margin. Will probably go to Gary Peters by an even smaller margin. I predict John James actually outperform Donald Trump here in 2020. Next up is the Georgia special election, and I can go more into depth for this later because it's actually a very interesting story. But I predict Doug Collins, who actually is not the incumbent, but he is challenging current Senator Kelly Loeffler. I think Doug Collins will come out victorious. It's a jungle primary. Anyway, I don't want to waste my time on that. But I think that Doug Collins will be the U.S. Senator from Georgia starting in the year 2021. Next up is the state of North Carolina. And this is a state that is going to be very, very close. I think North Carolina and Maine are going to be within a percentage point. Tom Tillis is the incumbent Republican senator. He won by the skin of his teeth in 2014 in a Republican wave year, which was a little bit surprising because he thought he would have won by a larger margin. He is not a very popular senator in North Carolina right now. So I'm going to have this state tilt towards the Democrats. Kyle Cunningham is a very strong opponent on the Democratic side. He came out of a Democratic primary that was a little bit contested versus a more radical Erica Smith. But I suspect Kyle Cunningham to very narrowly beat Tom Tillis, even though I suspect at large Donald Trump will win. And I also suspect Roy Cooper to win re-election as governor there. Now, Maine, I mean, really, I go back and forth on this. I don't know enough about the race and Susan Collins' opponent. I mean, who really knows? I mean, Maine is one of those states that leans Democratic at large, but Susan Collins is a very unique senator in that she's very, very moderate. She voted for Brett Kavanaugh to be the Supreme Court justice. She was one of those swing votes. A lot of people thought she was going to vote against him. But I definitely think that in terms of future political aspirations, that yes vote was something that she had to do if she wanted to remain U.S. Senator. And I suspect that she is going to win it by the skin of her teeth. And so there you have it. I have 51 seats for the Republicans, 49 for the Democrats. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. I mean, I think that special election seat in Georgia could go either way. I think this Senate seat in Maine could go either way. And I mean, if that's the case, then the Democrats win it. I mean, also, I want to look at Montana. I want to look at Iowa. And like even Kansas, these are states that could go either way. So although I think the Republicans have a small advantage right now, I do not think that the Republicans should just take it for granted. And if you see on Politico, they think that the Republicans are in a good position to hold the Senate, that I think they say it's likely GOP right now. And their Senate predictions mirror mine. Some, but they have a lot of toss-up states that I chose either way. So there you have it. Those are my election predictions, and I hope you like and subscribe, and stay tuned for a new video on Monday.